Welcome to Mr. Mars Lockdown History. Quick summaries about a range of different history topics. Today we're going back to one of the main features of the Cold War, although it's not always necessarily thought about being part of this, which is the space race. The space race is more commonly thought about, perhaps associated with movies and adventure and one small step and things like that, but in reality the space race was a key feature of the divide which took place between the Soviet Union and the United States for half a century at the end of World War II. Even before the end of World War II and the Cold War beginning, there was already the early start of a space race. Throughout the 1930s, Germany at first, but soon other countries, had been trying to develop their rocket technology. This was for a multitude of reasons, but not least the potential for using this in weaponry. During World War II, the various sides continued trying to develop this, each hoping to gain a potential advantage. At the end of World War II, this became even prominent, when first the United States and then the Soviet Union developed their own working atomic weapons. This meant that space and rocket technology became even more significant. Throughout the 1950s, there was clear evidence of efforts by both the United States and the Soviet Union to develop this. The Soviet Union's Sputnik satellites caused fear in the US that the Soviet Union were ahead, and it led to the establishment in America of NASA to develop their own space program. The real evidence that the Soviet Union were significantly further ahead came in April 1961, when the Soviet Union became the first country in the world to put a man in space. Yuri Gagarin, aboard the Vostok 1 ship, became a global celebrity, as his space journey made him not only a Soviet hero, but interested and famous throughout the world. There was major fears in America that this meant that the Soviets' space technology was well ahead of them, but that in turn suggested their weaponry was as well. Even in May 1961, only a month later, when American astronaut Alan Shepard became the first American man into space, there were still fears, and this led the then US President John F. Kennedy to make a commitment that within the decade, the United States would have put a man on the moon. Both the Soviet Union and America each tried to develop the capacity to put a man on the moon, but in July 1969, America became the first country to do this. In the Apollo 11 mission, famously Neil Armstrong and also Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins went on a journey to the moon. It took 3 days in total, and the culmination was the famous "one small step for man" quote, which has made Armstrong famous. After this there were more journeys to the moon, although it began to fall away eventually from public interest. The space race itself, in terms of the Cold War, began to take a different note throughout the 70s and then 80s. Initially, the 1970s were part of something called détente, when both America and the Soviet Union began to see an improvement in their relations. This was symbolized in July 1975 during the Apollo-Soyuz link-up, when American and Soviet rockets docked in space. The astronauts got out and even shared gifts. All of this suggested a brighter future and a more peaceful one. This began to fall away though with the end of détente, and in the 1980s the Cold War in space took on a different role. The United States tried to develop the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was nicknamed Star Wars. This program involved lasers in space and would allow them to destroy Soviet nuclear missiles. The Americans argued that this was in order to necessitate the end of all nuclear weapons. If both sides had such technology, there'd be no need for the weapons. The Soviets, however, feared that this would see them being left behind the United States, and others feel it would lead to the development of a new arms race as they tried to find new weaponry to give them the advantage in the Cold War. The space race thus continues in recent times with discussions about going to Mars, although it may arguably never take on the same prominence that it did when it was very much at the height of the Cold War.